Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, April 9th, 2026. Oil prices plunge and stocks soar after U.S. and Iran agree on a ceasefire. Traders work on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange during the morning trading last week in New York City. Oil prices plunged and stocks surged as global investors breathed a sigh of relief after the U.S. and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, and President Trump backed off his threat to wipe out Iran's whole civilization. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average surged more than 1,000 points in early morning trade, while the S&P and Nasdaq also rallied following strong gains in Asian and European stocks overnight. Meanwhile, both U.S. crude futures as well as Brent, the global benchmark, plunged amid hopes that ships could soon transit through the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial waterway through which about 20% of global oil flows. The strait had been virtually shut down by the war, sparking a global energy crisis. The strong market reaction comes after Trump announced the ceasefire on social media Tuesday evening. Less than 2 hours before a deadline he had imposed for Iran to meet his demands or face wide-scale destruction. Wild swings in the markets, Trump's threats and its reversal marked the latest rhetoric to roil Wall Street and global investors since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran more than a month ago. Investors have swung from hope that Trump and Iran will de-escalate the war to panic when it appears that the conflict is heating up and back again. Trump said in his agreement to a ceasefire is contingent on Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz immediately. It could take some time for global energy markets to recover, since some damage has already been done to old refineries and other infrastructure in the Middle East. The energy crisis sparked by the war with Iran has hurt consumers all over the world, including in the U.S., where national gasoline prices have risen above $4 per gallon. The dark cloud over Jefferson Boulevard. From the vibrant murals to the colorful historic storefronts, Jefferson Boulevard has long been the cultural and economic heart of the Latino community in the neighborhood of Oak Cliff in Dallas, Texas. Unfortunately, these days, a new story is unfolding just a few blocks away. The rapid growth of the Bishop Arts District is accelerating gentrification that will displace the Latino population by weakening historic businesses and transforming Oak Cliff into a place that will no longer serve the community that built it. Census data shows that areas in Oak Cliff are overwhelmingly Hispanic, about 52% Latino, with many immigrant and working class families calling it home. Even as the city tries to fix the damage, it is hard to overlook the contrast. Bishop Arts is filled with new residential buildings, coffee shops, and boutiques that were supported by city investments. Despite Jefferson receiving a fraction of the same investments, there is still a striking imbalance between the historic Latino corridor and its up and upcoming counterpart. Jefferson Boulevard is not just a street, but a cultural landmark. Research on immigrant communities shows that places like mercados are more than economic centers. They are spaces where people build networks, find jobs, and access support systems that are not always available elsewhere. Jefferson Boulevard functions in much the same way. Yet the growth of Bishop Arts is beginning to reshape who belongs in the area. In the zip code that includes Bishop Arts, the Latino population is still about 71%, but that number is changing fast. Between 2010 and 2014 alone, the white population increased by 15%. At the same time, Rising poverty values have forced many long-term residents to leave. The housing market is shifting from affordable housing to being replaced by houses selling upwards of $500,000. The cost of apartments rising up to 300% from what residents were previously paying. These prices are out of reach of the working class Latino families in the area, creating huge socioeconomic problems in Oak Cliff. This is what gentrification looks like. It is not just new buildings or nicer streets. It is the replacement of one community with another. Being born and raised in Oak Cliff, this change is very personal. Vamos a la Jefferson, my mother would always tell my siblings and I. It was a place where my father was able to cash his checks, but it also served as a shopping center where my mother would buy us clothes and cobijas, from the fashion store where my cousin bought her quinceañera dress, to being able to enjoy a good mangonada from my favorite fruteria. Walking down Jefferson today feels different. Some businesses are still there, holding on, but the energy is not the same. Meanwhile, Bishop Arts is full of people, attention, and investment. Jefferson Boulevard was never meant to compete with Bishop Arts. They both serve different purposes due to Jefferson being a cultural hub for small Latino businesses to thrive and where people felt at home. What makes this even more frustrating is that the city is not unaware of Jefferson's importance. In fact, Dallas has invested in the area before. According to city planning records, over $1.47 million was allocated for improvements along Jefferson Boulevard, including plans for better landscaping and pedestrian access. But was it enough? Was the investment too late? Because while Jefferson was receiving some improvements, Bishop Arts was experiencing a much larger scale of attention and investment. Therefore, while one area began to thrive, the other began to struggle to keep up. To be fair, there are many supporters who argue that the growth of Bishop Arts has brought positive changes. The area is safer, more walkable, and economically active. New businesses create jobs, and increased investment can benefit the city as a whole. The problem is not development in itself, but who is left out. That being said, when the growth leads to displacement, it is not progress. If the decline of Jefferson Boulevard continues, it would mean losing a space where Latino identity has been present for generations, and would erase a piece of Dallas that could not be recreated. Still, it is not too late to act. If Dallas truly values its Latino communities, it must invest in them directly. That means funding small businesses on Jefferson Boulevard, protecting affordable housing, and ensuring that longtime residents are not pushed out by rising costs. Finally, it is important for Jefferson to be treated with the same urgency as the Bishop Arts District, and not just be an afterthought. Development should allow for the community to grow as a whole, not come at the cost of displacement. As I return to Jefferson, I hope it won't become another story of a community being pushed aside in the name of progress. Jefferson has survived for generations and shall continue that way. Redefining our Latina identity in the face of gender expectations. Do housework, be beautiful, and start a family. Those are the expectations many Latinas face, and a recent study proves it. According to a poll survey by the Pew Research Center, these are the gender expectations that most Latinas in the U.S. experience. This is in addition to the pressure to provide for their loved ones at home, as well as their own families, or succeed in their jobs. I wish I were surprised by these statistics, but in my work as a therapist, I have learned that these are common expectations and pressures that many of my Latina clients are learning to navigate. These pressures have their roots in gender role expectations and cultural values, such as Marianismo, the expectation of women to prioritize their families and loved ones over themselves. A comment that one of my family members said to me when I was younger encapsulates this pressure. Yo te imagino que cuando termines tu carrera, vas a tener un buen trabajo con buen dinero, pero una casa sucia porque solo te enfocaste en tus estudios y nunca aprendiste a limpiar. Which translates to, I imagine that when you finish your degree, you will have a good job with good money, but a dirty house because you only focused on your studies and never learned to clean. This is just one example of the messages that Latinas are constantly exposed to about how much of a priority housework should be. It may seem like a common chore that everyone wants to and needs to do. However, it is accompanied by rigid expectations that it should be done in a specific manner and assumptions made about a woman's ability to maintain a household depending on how clean their home is. Be beautiful. Common dichos like antes muerta que sencilla, which roughly translate to death before being basic. Or the one I hear all the time, if you don't take care of yourself, then you will be giving your husband an excuse to look at someone else. Reinforce this expectation. The underlying message is that your worth is only defined by societal expectations of beauty. In my work as a therapist, I work with many Latinas who feel that they are not enough because they may not fit in the Eurocentric standard of beauty. This can lead to low self-esteem and challenges with confidence. It's crucial to understand that beauty comes in many forms, and everyone's unique features should be celebrated. Questions about children are synonymous with ¿y el novio? I have been told how important having children is, and in fact, I want children. However, the pressure is overwhelming. The day I got engaged, several people asked me and reminded me to start trying for a baby as soon as possible since I got married older. That said, not everyone wants to have a child, and that wish should be respected. Again, a person's self-worth and purpose should not be based on whether or not they want to have children. As if the pressure to start a family and be beautiful at all times is not enough, there is also the expectation to care for and or support parents and other elderly family members, whether financially or through physical caregiving. This expectation continues even after Latinas have their own families. These family pressures are often more intensely experienced by eldest hijas, who are predisposed biologically to mature earlier to better support their families, even while they are still children themselves. For example, many eldest daughter experience parentification, a phenomenon where children take on the roles and responsibilities typically meant for adults. This can involve managing household chores, caring for younger children, younger siblings, or acting as interpreters for non-English speaking parents. This added responsibility not only accelerates their maturity, but also places an emotional and psychological burden on them from a young age, which can impact their own development and future aspirations. These are not necessarily bad values to have, but these expectations represent messages that are a part of intergenerational cycle of trauma. The cycle that your worth is measured by how clean you can keep a home, how you can keep up with a beauty routine, or how good of a caregiver you can be. However, when I read the Pew Research Center survey results, I found that a majority of Latinas are satisfied with their life and happy with their personal lives despite the pressures. This high level of life satisfaction is not surprising to me, as everyone I work with is making a concerted effort to challenge these narratives and break these generational cycles of trauma. We are learning that while these may have been the norms in the past, we are creating a new narrative and breaking the cycle of having our worth be defined by these standards. That said, although most Latinas are satisfied and happy with their family and personal lives, I would like to share some strategies that have helped my clients and myself change the narrative and break the cycle. Affirmations. Regularly practice positive affirmations to reinforce your self-worth and capabilities. For example, start your day by looking in the mirror and saying, I am worthy, I am capable, and I am enough. just as I am. Soy poderosa, or try in Spanish. Soy valiosa, soy capaz y soy suficiente tal como soy. Soy poderosa. Self-compassion. Give yourself grace and understand that it's okay to not meet every expectation placed upon you. For instance, if you didn't get all the housework done today, remind yourself that it's alright and that your worth is not defined by these tasks. Your best looks different every day. Boundaries. Establish them and maintain healthy boundaries to protect your time, energy, and mental health. This could mean setting specific times for work and personal life, or saying no to additional responsibilities when you feel overwhelmed. Support. Seek out and lean on a support network of family, friends, or professionals who understand and uplift you. This might involve joining a support group, regularly talking with friends who share similar experiences, or seeking therapy. As always, si se puede. U.S. appeals order to use American Sign Language interpreters at White House briefings. The Department of Justice is appealing a federal judge's order requiring the White House to immediately begin providing American Sign Language ASL interpretation in its press briefings when President Trump or Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt are speaking. In a court filing on Friday, responding to U.S. District Judge Amir Ali's ruling, the Justice Department requested clarification on which types of events should have ASL interpretation available. The DOJ said it believes that the services should be limited to regularly scheduled briefings and not other events where the president takes questions from the press. It notified the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia that while the White House current vendor agreement for ASL interpretive services requires 24 hours notice. In the unlikely event the vendor cannot produce an interpreter to provide simultaneous briefing despite 24 hours notice, the White House intends to publish the ASL interpretation as soon as practicable, the DOJ said in a Friday's filing. The department said the White House is working to establish a publicly accessible channel showing ASL interpretation that would be provided simultaneously with every press briefing subject to the injunction. The DOJ said the judge's orders should not apply to remarks made in a broad set of scenarios. The White House does not understand press briefings to encompass events with other purposes, such as a ceremony or a speech, at which the president may choose to take questions from the press, the department said. Ali issued the preliminary injunction on November 4th and ordered the Trump administration to update the court on compliance by last Friday. White House press briefings engage the American people on important issues affecting their daily lives. In recent months, war, the economy, and healthcare, and in most recent years, a global pandemic, Ali wrote in the order. The exclusion of deaf Americans from that programming, in addition to likely violating the Rehabilitation Act, is clear and present harm, and the court cannot meaningfully remedy after the fact. The government's appeal of Ali's order is being filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. The White House stopped using live ASL interpreters at briefings and other public events when Trump began his second term in January. The National Association of the Deaf and two deaf men filed the lawsuit against Trump and Leavitt in May. The suit also names White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, along with the offices for President and Vice President. It alleges the White House failure to provide ASL violates Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. The law prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in programs conducted by the federal government. The suit also claims the White House is in violation of the First and Fifth Amendments, which protect free speech and provide for due process, respectively. In a new filing on Monday, the NAD told the court the White House has failed to comply with its order and argued the injunction covers all publicly announced press briefings, including those scheduled with less than 24-hour notice. The group's interim CEO, Bobby Beth Scoggins, told NPR in a statement last week that the organization is pleased that deaf and hard of hearing Americans will soon regain access to important information from the federal government. American Sign Language and accurate captioning are both essential to ensuring full and equal access to information, Scoggins said. ASL and English are distinct languages. And captions alone cannot meet the needs of everyone in our community. The court's ruling affirms what we have long known. Equal access to information from the White House is not optional. We deserve the same timely, direct access to White House briefings as everyone else. Ali's order specifies that the ASL interpretation must be visible and signed by a qualified interpreter. He was not persuaded by White House arguments that it does provide closed captioning. The defendants correctly know that the plaintiffs are entitled only to reasonable accommodation, but it is not reasonable. Indeed, it can hardly be called an accommodation at all. To transcribe press briefings into a language that Ford and many NAD members do not know, Ali said in his opinion. Ali is referring to plaintiff Derek Ford. According to the NAD, hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. communicate mainly in ASL, and many deaf and hard of hearing people do not know English. ASL has its own vocabulary and grammar. That is different from English. The judge stopped short of granting the group's request to require ASL interpretation at briefings and events conducted by the vice president. First Lady, and Second Lady. Ollie also declined at this time to require that interpretation be provided to news networks and uploaded to the White House website and social media pages. Scoggins say the NAD will continue to vigorously pursue all relief sought in its lawsuit. The preliminary injunction is intended to give temporary relief sought in its lawsuit. The preliminary injunction is intended to give temporary relief to the group and the plaintiffs as the case plays out in the legal system.